So, today we will be looking at understanding the importance of the United States in a historical perspective. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I am a senior history major and in college, obviously. And I'm just trying to bring this video out to give those of you who may be in high school, maybe you're in college currently, or you're just doing some research and looking for a fun YouTube video to understand United States history a little bit. So today I am going to start off by discussing why the colonies, the 13 original colonies of the United States, why they lost faith in Great Britain before the Revolutionary War. So essentially what is going on here is the Great British Empire was at a point where they had financed the colonies throughout the French and Indian War. And in a form of repayment or searching for a sense of return on investment, basically, they chose to tax the colonies. And this made the colonies frustrated. Okay, all the people were not happy with this. For the most part, the people who had come to America, they had come here with the thought that Britain would be very hands-off, and that was not the case. For the most part, up until the 1760s, Britain had been, for the most part, hands-off. But now that they had aided in the war effort, they were really turning to the colonies to make money back for the money that they had spent, which, in a historical perspective and even a modern perspective, that's pretty reasonable. The British Empire had given these resources to the colonies, and they expected some form of payment back. But the issue here is that the colonists didn't like this at all. And this really comes out of acts that were implemented, such as the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act is one of the most crucial impacts on early American history to understanding why the Revolutionary War happened. The Stamp Act was essentially taxing every form of paper in the colonies, from playing cards to newspapers to documents. Anything, for the most part, that wasn't government related was getting taxed on. This included books as well, to even just think about that. So if you wanted to go to the store, pick up a book, pick up a newspaper, pick up a deck of cards, you had to pay an additional tax fee to the British government. And the people did not like this. And so the Stamp Act was eventually repealed, but Britain didn't stop there. They moved on to other taxes, and you can see here on the slide, I have the Boston Tea Party shown, because the British were just going on to tax other things. And to dumb this down, the colonists didn't like this. And it got to a point where they had come to a point where they wanted no taxation without representation. And that is a crucial point in understanding why the colonies broke away from the British Empire. They felt that they did not have an equal say in Parliament to prevent situations like this from happening, and this caused them to revolt and to fight back, and eventually it caused for the Declaration of Independence in 1776. So, the Declaration of Independence was signed by our founding fathers in 1776 and was brought forth to the king in July of 1776. And if you don't know, this is why we celebrate Independence Day on July 4th every year. I don't know if you've been living under a rock, but that is why we celebrate the 4th of July. So the Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson, and our founding fathers, they signed this Declaration for Independence, and it has grown to fade away from the understanding of why the Declaration of Independence was such a radical document for its time. This is something that I feel personally, as a history major in college, historians fail to emphasize. Okay, the Declaration of Independence was an extremely radical document for its time. There were very, very few democratic type societies to the extent that the United States was attempting to be at this point in time. They were basically using this document as a way to humiliate King George III, point out his flaws, point out why they were breaking away, why they were becoming the United States of America. And rather than being a divided nation, they would come together as 13 colonies to create the United States of America. And it was essentially to be a slap in the face to the king. They were essentially saying, this is why we're breaking away. This is why we're starting our own nation. You screwed up, so we are doing our own thing now. The king didn't like this, obviously, and Britain and America went to war. And basically, to sum up the Revolutionary War, America pushed the British and the Loyalists out of the United States for the most part, which took almost a decade, and eventually they would come back in the War of 1812, and there would be all this, It was a hard breakup for the British to really comprehend, and it eventually drove King George to go crazy. So then we move on to the Constitution of the United States, which was written in the Constitutional Convention in 1783, written and ratified, I should say. And the Constitution is the most important document in United States history. I don't care what anyone else says. This is the most important document. And it comes down to the Bill of Rights. Okay, for its time, it was very unique. At this point in history, nobody had seen people with holding unconditional rights. And there's a presentist point of view nowadays that people look at the Constitution and they say, well, how did our founding fathers create this document, talk about the pursuit of happiness, talk about how everybody has unalienable rights, and yet women didn't get the right to vote until later on? Minorities didn't get rights until much later on. This is a very controversial topic that we must think about and look at in a historical perspective. Whether or not you agree with how the Constitution is written, there is no doubt that the Bill of Rights was the stepping stone for America going forward, and not only for the United States, but also the rest of the world, because it wasn't until the United States that the rest of the world really started considering that people have individual rights and people deserve certain things in a way that had never been done before. And we look at the Bill of Rights, we look at the freedom of speech, and basically under the freedom of speech right now, I'm able to make this video and make this discussion. And it's very important to our nation, and it's very important to our history. And this was a massive stepping stone to allow people to do practically anything within the law. And that is a phenomenal piece of history and is something we must look at. But also, our founding fathers, they were trying to hold together the 13 colonies. The relationship between the 13 colonies was very, very fragile at the time. Okay, they had just broken away from Britain within the last decade. They were not too unified, and the Articles of Confederation were a failure. They were trying to figure out how to be a successful operating country. And so they needed to be careful with the unification to make sure that they were maintaining this relationship between the colonies and only to expand upon it. They were trying to keep everybody in check and making sure everybody was on the same page for the most part. So in my opinion, that is why we look back and we wonder, well, how come women didn't have rights? How come other people didn't have rights? Slavery still existed. Although there were some founding fathers who were concerned about these issues, they were not willing to destroy that relationship at the time. And it's a very controversial topic and something I'm not going to go into too deep, but I just wanted to touch on it and brush it up a little bit, especially for those of you who may be in high school, who may be learning this in depth for the first time, to just understand it a little bit as to why certain people, certain groups of people were left out of the Constitution. And based upon all of that, based upon the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, we can now look back at the modern world in the United States in retrospect and try to understand how we got from there to here. So you can see on this slide, I have a ton of photos that, they're not, they're a little different from each other. We got a lot of war, we got a lot of media, we got presidents on here, we've got just a lot to take in. And, I'm trying to cover a 200-year gap from right to this point, okay? So, based upon these freedoms that were created by our founding fathers, the nation was able to grow and expand. For better or for worse, it happened. So we can see in the top left corner, we can see the Civil War is an example I have on here. The Union versus the Confederacy. The difference in ideology of keeping the nation together. Slavery was not abolished by President Lincoln because he solely believed that slavery should not exist. He was trying to maintain the Union and keep it together to the best of his extent. And although he was an abolitionist, I do not personally believe that he wanted to completely do away with slavery because it was wrong. He was just trying to maintain a nation. But because of that, the nation was able to grow and expand. The Industrial Revolution blew up. The nation was becoming wealthier. More innovation was happening. You can see Teddy Roosevelt with his big stick diplomacy photo. I love that photo. The nation was growing. The military powers were expanding. And these are because of the freedom and liberties, not only from our founding fathers, but that were developing over time. And eventually, when the Great War happened in the in the late 1910s, the military was having phenomenal technological advancements, and this is a result of war and freedom. And basically, these foundations were allowing the home front to also expand. You can see Mickey Mouse is up there. These innovations, television, telephone, light bulbs, all of these things directly are a derivative of the foundation of the nation, which it's interesting to think about it that way, because especially if you're in high school, you're not thinking of the Declaration of Independence being a direct cause for the video games you have at home or Netflix, You don't think of it that way. You don't think of, the Constitution of the United States, something I learned about in the 5th grade. That's the reason that I drive a car today, or I'm learning to drive a car. You don't think of it that way, but that's the direct result, okay? And war is also a direct result of technological expansion, okay? You can see I have the Iwo Jima photo in the left on the middle row. World War II, World War I, the Korean War, Vietnam War. War is the greatest impact on technological advancements. If it wasn't for war, we wouldn't have computers. If it wasn't for any of this, certain people wouldn't have certain things in their homes. People wouldn't have rights. It would be a very different world. And it's crazy to think about it that way. So, now I pose the question, did the United States lose its foundational principles? The United States broke away from Great Britain in 1776 because the British were having tyrannical rule over the colonies that the colonists didn't like. They were imposing laws and action upon civilians in a way that they didn't like. No taxation without representation. But yet, let's look at the 20th century. Let's fast forward 200 years. Look at Vietnam. Look at Korea. Look at the Middle East. Look at how the United States have gotten involved in conflicts and wars that in no way, shape, or form really affected the home front. The United States, Bay of Pigs invasion, trying to attempt to prevent the spread of communism. American anti-communism was very real for the entire second half of the 20th century. Communism is a bad thing in a historical perspective. It was a dangerous philosophy. Communist countries have proven to be terrible. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at China. Look at Cuba. Look at Vietnam. Look at North Korea. These are dangerous countries. But should the United States have gotten involved in global conflicts? Well, that's up for you to decide. Personally, I think that the United States has lost its foundational principles, but have also not only maintained them, but have also expanded upon them. So it's a mix of both, because in a way, United States got involved with these issues that had nothing to do with us, but we have only grown since then. And I want you all to look at the bottom row. It's very different than the top two rows. We got Star Wars, Back to the Future, Dirty Harry, Apple iPhones, NWA, Call of Duty, Marvel, DC, Halo, SpongeBob, and one of the crown jewels of the United States, New York City. Look at that entire bottom row and think about our foundation. Okay, think about how these would not exist if it weren't for the foundation of our nation. Star Wars wouldn't exist without the Bill of Rights. Isn't that weird to think about? The X-Men wouldn't exist without the Bill of Rights. Master Chief, NWA, pro gaming wouldn't exist without the foundation of our nation. And, that's pretty basic to understand. If there was no foundation of the nation, this country wouldn't exist, obviously. But it's the way that we have grown since then. Through war, through technological advancements, through the expansion of the Constitution, we have not only grown, but we have been a successful nation since then. And it is why the United States is one of the most influential global superpowers of all time. So I just want you all to think about this. Just consider the United States' importance from Revolutionary period to the modern day period. This was just a brief overview. I could obviously go in depth on all of these subjects. The Civil War is its own thing. You can make hours on end documentaries about it. Same with the Industrial Revolution and the Great War and World War II and Vietnam and Korea and the modern media period. Really, you could just go into all of these in depth. But I wanted to really touch on the beginning of the foundation of our nation in a much more in-depth approach so that we could all understand that the foundation of the country was the most important aspect of American history into building the seeds for all of these to be possible. So I thank you very much for listening. Consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe even. I'm considering making more of these types of videos, and this was just kind of a test, see how this goes. Like I said, I'm a senior in college, and I study history, and I'm very interested in everything you see on this last slide, and would love to talk more about it. So thank you for listening.